Welcome to my channel, The Binge Eating Therapist. I'm Sarah, former binge eater turned psychotherapist, and my mission is to use this space to bring content to you to help you understand your struggle with food and break free from binge eating. Today's video is a little bit different. I thought I would have a go at doing one of these reaction videos. They seem to be really popular on YouTube, and I did a poll and quite a few of you liked the idea, some of you not so much. But hopefully you will still find it interesting and useful. I tried to think of something that hadn't been done before, and so I've decided to do the BBC coverage of binge eating from last year. They contacted me last year to say they were doing this piece and would I like to be involved. And I had a really good feeling about the initial call. The woman I spoke to, I think her name was Charlotte, was really inquisitive. She had suggestions, but she was very clear that she wanted my feedback because they wanted to present it in an accurate and appropriate way. So one of the things that they talked about doing was getting people struggling with binge eating in to cook a meal and to teach them how to cook a meal. And I was like, no, it's not. People don't struggle with binge eating because they can't cook. They don't struggle with binge eating because they don't know about nutrition. And I really appreciated her willingness to listen to feedback. She's like, okay, we won't do that. And then one of the other things I wanted to do was to get people to come into the studio and bring like a bag with an example of a binge, like basically bringing their binge with them onto television in person. And I again said, I wouldn't want to do that to people. I can only imagine how I would have felt back then. I think I would have wanted to do something like this to raise awareness even when I was struggling, but the idea of bringing and visually representing what I might binge on, I think I would have, it's a vulnerable thing to ask of someone to do that on national television. So it was another one that I advised against, and they listened, so fair play to them. However, at the time when this segment came out, I wasn't really very happy with it. There were lots of things that bothered me. Interestingly, going back and watching it again for this video, I've kind of come round a bit because they had 5 or 6 minutes to try and convey what binge eating disorder was and what it was like to struggle with it. And that's a big ask. It's probably never going to feel like enough for me because I want them to do an hour show. I want them to do a whole day talking about binge eating so that people can really understand what this problem is. But of course, that's not going to happen. So what they did, they've got 2 people to share their stories, Lauren and Martha. There was a third person, a man, who was going to share his experience, and he decided to pull out. I had an exchange with him, and he said he felt really pressured by the journalists to talk about it in a certain way, and he felt like they were trying to misrepresent something. So he wasn't very happy about that. I've also spoken with Martha and Lauren since the filming. And Martha had a slightly similar experience where she felt a little bit pushed into saying things again and in a certain way. I think they're trying to create a piece that's going to capture people's interest. They interviewed me for the segment. I was interviewed for an hour and they used about 30 seconds of it, which is what I was expecting. You know, it's only a very short segment. And again, like I talked about so many things in that hour about binge eating that I would want people to understand. And the only bits they used were the bits that they had basically asked me to say. And I was happy to say it because it was absolutely true and I agreed with what it was they wanted me to say. But the whole thing did feel a little bit scripted for my liking. But I get it. They're trying to convey something. And I realise I've been talking for 4 minutes and I haven't even shown you any of it yet. Let's have a look. I don't know if I'm ever going to be any good at these videos. But anyway, let's have a look at Lauren's story.
Can be maybe 1 to 2 times a day. Pizzas, takeaway pizzas, McDonald's. It doesn't just stop at that takeaway of an evening or a fast food. Packets of crisps, quantities, maybe packs of like croissants and things, some chocolate or some chocolate yogurts. Since he was born, I've put on 9 stone. It is a daily battle, yeah. You know, once that day is drawing to a close, I know that my battle starts as soon as sort of he's in bed. But yeah, I am at a point where I am desperate. I desperately want help.
Lauren tells me she hides evidence of binges.
Instead of sort of routinely putting the waste or the rubbish in my kitchen bin, I would fill a black bag and put it straight into the bin, so that if anybody came round and they were to look in sort of my kitchen bin, they wouldn't see any evidence.
One of the things I like about how they represented it is when she talks about it, the battle starting in the evening. I think a lot of people can relate to that. I think the hiding of the food, taking the rubbish out, is absolutely something I did, and many people have shared that they've done that too. You know, they're making a television thing here. They want to make a big thing about, look at how much weight she gained, and let's make sure that we see pictures of her looking smaller as well, so that we've got this contrast. They made quite a big thing out of Lauren's weight and the weight gain, and I get it. They're trying to convey how extreme this behaviour was and the result of it. Of course, they put the pictures of her looking smaller and how she looks today, and that contrast thing, it's really interesting for me to see how they are trying to make compelling television. So there are always going to be emphasis on the most dramatic part of the story. And when she's listing off all the foods, like, again, I get it, you're trying to convey the quantities, but it is only certain types of foods that are being listed, and I feel like that just kind of makes it look a little bit like people who are binge eating are only eating on quote-unquote junk foods. And that, I think, isn't the most helpful thing to be conveying to people when we're talking about wanting people to relate. Because that, for me, was my intention, my goal behind being involved in this segment, is I wanted people to see it who maybe hadn't realised they were struggling with this and gone, oh, that's me. And so I think there are parts of Lauren's stories when she talks about feeling desperate, battle, changes in weight, all these kinds of things that I think people will relate to, and maybe you do. Now let's have a look at Martha's story, because there are some contrasts between Martha and Lauren.
It's just a lack of thinking, and it just feels like a frenzy. And the only way to kind of get rid of that feeling, whatever that is to binge and to eat until I just can't feel it anymore. It's just eating anything I can get my hands on in the shortest amount of time possible. Combinations of foods that I might want separately but just don't have the time or the effort to separate. Frozen bread, frozen Yorkshire puddings. I don't want to be caught, I don't want to be toasting bread, I don't want to put things in the oven. I just want to eat as much as possible in the shortest amount of time. I'll grab the whole box of cereal and bring up a whole pint of milk and then bring that upstairs to my room and keep it in my cupboard in case someone comes in.
These aren't rational choices about foods
No.
that you enjoy.
No, it's not rational, and it doesn't taste nice a lot of the time. Like crunching on frozen bread on literal just ice is not a pleasant experience, and adding butter to that is not tasty. That's just more food, more calories. It's not a treat, it's not a pleasant experience, it's not a late night snack, it's not a get home at the end of the day and enjoy something.
It's just a compulsion and you want it to stop.
Yeah, I mean, I'm crying whilst eating most of the time.
Martha tells me there were occasions when she took food from other homes.
And I would just feel my bag just filled with wrappers of their food, and just feeling so guilty. It's not something you want to do. It's not something that sits with your values. You don't agree with it. It's all awful.
It's a compulsion.
Yeah, it feels compulsive, and there's no alternative until you kind of fill up to the point you can't eat anymore.
One thing I love about the way Martha shares what's going on is she does quite a good job of explaining that build up to that feeling, and the only way to get rid of it is to binge. The strength of the compulsion, I think, is shared quite well in this story. And of course, they wanted to use the bit about eating food out the freezer. I guess they want to show how extreme it can be. One of my concerns at the time when they did that was I was worried that maybe that might lose some people, because people watching these stories might be like, well, I don't eat the things that Lauren has shared that she eats, and I'm not eating food from the freezer, so maybe I'm not that bad, even though I'm completely miserable and obsessed with food all the time. So I get it, you're not going to be able to find stories that's going to be able to represent everything. When the journalist spoke to me, she told me that Martha had shared about eating food that didn't belong to her. And she was in a bit of a moral dilemma about whether to include that, because she was concerned about the effects that might have on Martha to publicly share that she's taken food that doesn't belong to her. And I normalised that with the journalist and talked about it a little bit in my clip, but ultimately I did say I think I would prefer you not to use it. Whilst I think it was helpful for other people to hear that, I also had concerns about the potential impact on Martha. They did decide to use it. That was one thing they didn't listen to me about. I think they thought it was just great telly. But I spoke to Martha afterwards, and she's pretty okay with having shared that. And I stand in solidarity with you, Martha, because I have definitely eaten food that doesn't belong to me. I have worked with parents who have eaten food belonging to their children and had such shame about that. That is the depth of the compulsion. And so I think she communicated it pretty well. Again, she did say that the journalist was pushing her a little bit in how she wanted her to say things. And I get it, it's tricky to find that balance. So I had 2 small clips in this piece, and I'm going to show you them now. I think we have no idea about the scale of this problem. My instinct is that it's huge.
Sarah is a therapist who's tackled her own binge eating disorder.
Binge eating disorder is twice as common as anorexia, and it's also more common than bulimia. There's a sense that you've just lost control. Taking food out of the rubbish bin, taking food that doesn't belong to them. All of this is really common. So if anybody's watching this, I would just want to say that you're not alone. So I think this is a problem that of huge proportions that we're just not aware about. We don't know enough about it. We need to get better help, and that means people going to their GPs to tell them what's happening. Because until we know who's struggling, we don't know the size of this problem, and therefore the resources are just not going to be there for it. Firstly, why have they got to do such extreme close-ups? And I found it, when I first saw this, I found it just from like a body image perspective, quite difficult to watch. This is how I prefer to speak. I want to talk down the camera. I want to feel connected to the people that I'm talking to as well. And having a camera shoved in my face where I had so much makeup on and all shiny, like the first time I watched it, I couldn't even pay attention to what I was actually saying. But when I go back, I was disappointed because there were so many things that I wanted to tell people, like if they were struggling with this. And the focus was very much on the scale of the problem, which in hindsight of a year later, I get it. That's what this piece is about. It's an awareness piece. It's not really a speaking to people who are struggling and what you can do about it piece. And the whole point of doing a video to raise awareness on the subject is to be able to direct people as to where to get help. This is a snippet from the conversation that was had with the presenter and the guest from Binge.
It's really important whenever we talk about stories like this to talk about how people can be helped.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy. I mean, we heard that, I think it was Martha, I think. You heard this sort of despair in her own voice, and when she was asked that question about how do you feel, what hope is there for people, and what practical help can there be?
I think there's a lot of hope, and I think that's something that is so important to remember. Lots of people can feel very hopeless, like we saw, but actually getting that right help and support is so important. So I guess for me, I'd recommend calling BEAT, the eating disorder charity. They have a helpline that's open 365 days a year, so giving them a ring and talking things through.
So one thing the BBC were keen on doing was having diversity. So they did want a man, and as I mentioned, the man decided not to take part. But there was a size diversity between Lauren and Martha. And here was the presenter's comments about this.
For example, because when you look at Martha, I mean, Lauren was saying that she'd put on weight, but when you look at Martha, she doesn't look like she's someone who particularly is binge eating regularly.
Yeah.
So if you're triaging with the GP and they're seeing you, one of the things we've heard is with concerns about anorexia, oh, well, your weight's fine. How easy is it to kind of communicate that this is a problem?
Yeah, I think
Forgetting the first step, which as Charlie alluded to, is so difficult anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's talking about that distress. Like I said, writing down what you want to say to the GP. Beat have a GP leaflet on their website, which kind of talks through what it is that people can tell their GP and actually gives GPs advice, because we know that kind of medical students aren't always trained in eating disorders. So GPs are obviously doing their best, but they can't know about everything. So Beat have done a leaflet to kind of take the GP through step-by steps in terms of making that referral to eating disorder services as well.
I did go and have a look at this GP leaflet that Beat suggest using in order to go to the GP, and I was really disappointed with it. I will put a link to the leaflet below, and I'd be interested in your thoughts as well, but it's so basic common sense, like just have a think about what you're going to say beforehand and maybe write it all down. But there's no leaflet specific to binge eating, it's just eating disorders in general. So as such, I just think it just doesn't have much useful information. It says a couple of things about obstacles you might face at the GPs. So if the GP makes a comment about your weight not being too much of a problem, what you might say in response to that. But in my mind, I could see what the GP would say back to that, and then you're out of luck. I'm really conscious that it's easy to be the one to criticise what other people are doing, but we are an eating disorder charity. Binge eating disorder is more common than any of the other eating disorders, so I think they could do a bit better. And the feedback that I'm getting from people struggling with binge eating who have contacted Beat, I had a message only a couple of days ago because I shared something on my stories about Beat from somebody who said that they spoke to someone on the Beat helpline and were made to feel like this was all in their head, that they didn't really have a problem, and went away feeling completely invalidated. But going back to the BBC coverage, this is the bit that I feel they really dropped the ball. Throughout this whole segment, which was about 5 to 6 minutes long, there was 1.5 minutes of images like this that were linking the segments together. The issue being is that a picture paints 1,000 words. People are much more affected by imagery because imagery bypasses the language centres. So images like this are really, really harmful because they are presenting binge eating as eating all of these kinds of foods. And actually people will binge eat on many, many different foods. And I feel like the lack of diversity of foods is really problematic when we're trying to get people to understand what it's like if they don't struggle with it themselves. So this was something I was not consulted or asked about. I didn't get to see the final edit before it went out, so I wasn't able to give my opinion on this, but this was the bit that bothered me the most, was this use of these kinds of horrible images that miss the nuance and the complexities of how somebody might binge eat. I also don't know if I'm actually allowed to use this footage on these kinds of videos, so this video might even end up being taken down. I don't know. I don't even know how this works, so I'll just plead ignorance. What is it they say? Better to ask for forgiveness than for permission. So that's the attitude I'm going to take with using the BBC footage. Anyway, I know a lot of you who follow me on Instagram, you would have seen this footage at the time when I posted it there. Got away with it then. Let's see if I get away with it here. I don't really know how to sign this off. I kind of feel like reaction videos are supposed to be a bit more hyperbolic with all the reactions, but I don't know, I can't. I'm just not a hammy person. I can't ham it up. And those of you that have been watching me for a while probably wouldn't want me to, because you'd see straight through that. So I just thought I'd show you what the BBC did and what I thought about it. That's it. Hope you enjoyed it. See you on the next video.